What it do, man? Y'all know who it is. It's the mayor slash the Kane slash Mr. 500 Chains. You know what I'm saying? Mr. My Medallion got a chain. You know, the dude that bring that info to you, right? Hashtag info community. We bringing information back, man. Shouts out to all my peoples out there. Right now we smoking on some shit. What is this? Let me think. It's like mango flush. It's something, bro. Like something like that. So let me light this up. So we'll be smoking this while we watching this, but this is about Halloween. You know what I'm saying? Where the whole Halloween tradition comes from, right? This is gonna break it down. Now, if you don't like any kind of Christian speaking at all, then you might not like this video. And I'm not saying that I'm a Christian. I'm not a Christian. I'm a Hebrew Israelite. You know, but I can hear truth from anybody. I don't just shun people out because of what your religious background is. I listen to people. You know what I'm saying? You can learn a lot from anybody. You can learn a lot from a dummy. You can learn a lot, period. Right? So before this gets started, I did this video back in 2012. And this is Halloween Exposed. And I thought since it was October, this would be a perfect time for me to reintroduce y'all to something that I did in 2012 where I was speaking on this. And you know how I go at the end. I'm going to go ahead and give you a summary of everything that you just seen. But till then, I like to thank all y'all for coming out, back. Let's get to the show.
Soon, children across the country will put on their favorite costume on Halloween night, and then with great anticipation, they'll go from house to house, collecting as much candy as they can. But is Halloween a truly innocent celebration, or does it have a darker side? How did Halloween get started? What should Christians and non-Christians alike know about participating in this event? Where did the custom of trick-or-treating come from? Why is it that at Halloween we buy a pumpkin, carve a face on it, and then put a lighted candle inside of it? Why do our children wear Halloween masks and costumes? Why do we create haunted houses, tell ghost stories, and show pictures of witches? What significance do they all have? We invite you to find out the answers to all of these questions and more on this edition of the John Ankerberg Show. Welcome to our program. I'm sure that you know that on October 31st, Halloween night, hundreds of thousands of children across America will dress in costumes, which range from the cute and the sweet to the macabre and satanic. And these children will go from door to door in the neighborhood yelling, "Trick or treat!" and collecting as much candy as they can. But let me ask you this, where did the customs, the rituals, the symbols of Halloween come from? Why do we do the things that we do on Halloween night? Why do we carve jack-o'-lanterns? Why do children dress up in costumes? Where did the tradition of bobbing for apples at parties originate? And why is it that when children approach a stranger's door, that they yell out the words, "Trick or treat"? How did the custom of orange and black as the colors of Halloween get started? Well,
So let's get it.
these are just some of the questions that Dr. John Weldon and I set out to answer before writing our Facts on Halloween book. Now, Dr. Weldon has co-authored with me over 44 different books, and he's a dear, dear friend. Maybe you know that he has 3 master's degrees and 2 doctorates, one in comparative religions and the other in contemporary religious movements. He's also the chief researcher of the Ankerberg Theological Research Institute. And to start us off today, I'd like you to hear his answers to the question, where did Halloween come from? From what did Halloween originate? Here are his answers.
John, I think it's very important for parents, especially Christian parents, to realize that Halloween is not a Christian holiday. In fact, its roots go back to ancient paganism and the Celtic and Druid beliefs that involved such things as divination, contact with spirits, and even something as horrible as human sacrifice.
Now, if you're not up on your history, you're probably wondering, who were the Celts and the Druids? Where did they live? Tell me a little bit more about them.
Okay, who were the Celts? The Celts were a group of people that came from Asia and migrated north to northern France and the British Isles. Their priestly class were known as the Druids, and they were the ones that regulated the religious observances and practices of the Celts.
Next, you may be asking, specifically, John, how does Halloween relate to the ancient pagan religious practices of the Celts? Well, Dr. Weldon explains, and I want you to listen very carefully.
Halloween relates to this ancient pagan religion in a variety of ways. For example, there were two key days celebrated in the Celtic religion. One of those days was the day in which the god of the dead, or the god of death, Samhain, actually was believed to release the souls of the good and evil spirits. And these good and evil spirits were released for a period of time to go back and mingle among the living. Today, the idea that Halloween involves good and evil spirits that are roaming about actually is traced back to this ancient Druidic belief.
Now, what else has come down to us from the past to make Halloween what it is today? I think if you understand what Dr. John Weldon says next, you will start to put some important pieces of the puzzle together. Listen.
What the Druids and Celtic peoples were involved in really was a form of spiritism, of contacting the spirits, of attempting to appease or placate the spirits so that the spirits would treat them in a good manner. Of course, biblically, this is something that God is very concerned about. For example, in Deuteronomy 18, verses 10 and 11, God says, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices his son or daughter in the fire." That refers to human sacrifice, something that the Celts and the Druids themselves practiced. Who practices divination or sorcery, something else that was practiced. Interprets omens, engages in witchcraft or casts spells, or who is a medium or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. And of course, this is something that the ancient Celts practiced as well. In fact, some of them would actually fall upon the graves in an attempt to establish contact with the dead and to get divinatory or information about the future from the dead. Very clearly, we see that God condemns the practice that the ancient Druids and the Celts engaged in of contacting the spirit world and attempting to contact the dead.
Now let me ask you a question. What is the date every year that we celebrate Halloween? Well, you know that it's October 31st. But do you know why we celebrate Halloween on October 31st? What's significant about this particular date? Dr. John Weldon explains.
I think it's very interesting that the very day that we celebrate as Halloween, October 31st, was the last day of the year in the Celtic religion. Their new year began on November 1st, and on the day before their new year, it was believed that the god of death, or the god of the dead, actually released the different souls of the good and evil. The evil souls were ultimately decreed to go into the form of animals, whereas the good souls were allowed to come back as humans. In other words, there was a belief in reincarnation. But essentially, the people believed that souls of good and evil spirits roamed about on this day, on Hallows Eve, just before their new year began.
I'm a Jew, he a Jew, she a Jew, we some Jews. Wouldn't you like to be a Jew too? Only if you're in the bloodline.
Now after hearing that, you may be saying, you guys must be making this up. I mean, isn't Halloween nothing more than an innocent holiday with some fun-filled practices? Who else agrees with you that Halloween stemmed from such terrible pagan practices? Well, if you've got an Encyclopedia Britannica in your home, turn to the article on Halloween in it, and you'll read this information. Quote, "In ancient Britain and Ireland, the Celtic festival of Samhain was observed on October 31st, at the end of the summer." Now you remember that Samhain was the name of the chief Druidic god, the name they gave to him showing that he was the Lord of the Dead, or the Lord of Death. The Encyclopedia Britannica continues, "The souls of the dead were supposed to revisit their homes on this day. and the autumnal festival acquired sinister significance, with ghosts, witches, goblins, black cats, fairies, and demons of all kinds said to be roaming about. It was the time to placate the supernatural powers controlling the processes of nature. In addition, Halloween was thought to be the most favorable time for divinations concerning marriage, luck, health, and death. It was the only day on which the help of the devil was invoked for such purposes. End quote. Now, in the weeks to come, we're going to look at why ghosts and witches, black cats, Ouija boards, and various other forms of divination all are associated with Halloween. As you will learn as we go along, these practices all go back to the occult and spiritistic pagan religious practices of the past. In fact, I'd like you to listen as Dr. Weldon explains why Halloween night was considered in ancient history to be the very best day in the entire year for contacting the spirit world.
In fact, Halloween back then was thought to be the very best time for contacting the spirit world because the veil that separated the material and spiritual worlds was thinnest at that time, and this in fact is something that is believed in witchcraft today, and that is why they celebrate October 31st as one of their most special days.
Now in a moment we're going to take a break, and when we return, we're going to look at the specific customs and practices of Halloween that are related to the ancient pagan religious practices of the past. And the reason this is so important is because on Halloween night, our children are imitating and emulating some of the very practices that those in ancient pagan religions performed. So please stick with me. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Let's get down to brass tacks. What specific customs and practices of Halloween are our children involved in today that are directly related back to the ancient pagan religious practices of the Celts? Dr. John Weldon tells us.
What specific customs of Halloween today are related to the ancient practices of the Celts? Well, almost all of them. For example, we have the idea of dressing in costumes. The ancient Celts believed that the spirits were released on this day, and because there were both good and evil spirits released, they would set out food for the good spirits, but they attempted to hide from the evil spirits because they feared them. So some people would put on masks and costumes in order to hide from the evil spirits. Trick-or-treating is related to the ancient Celtic practice. If food was not placed out for the spirits could get angry. The Celts believed it was important to appease the spirits in order to keep them happy. And so by placing food in their homes, they were either welcoming the spirits, the good spirits, or they were attempting to keep the evil spirits appeased.
Now this next part I don't want you to miss. Why is it that our children go down the streets wearing costumes, collecting food and candy, and yelling out the phrase, "trick or treat," when they come to the door of somebody's house? Did you know it's because these customs come right out of the pagan religious beliefs and practices of yesteryear? Well, it's true, and you can prove this by looking at Volume 1 of Man, Myth, and Magic, page 67, where we're told, All Hallows Eve, or Halloween, as the beginning of winter and the dying time of the old year, was a night when the dead supposedly stalked the countryside. Offerings of food and drink were put out for the ghosts. And further in Volume 4 of Man, Myth, and Magic, we're told, because the Druids believed that during Samhain, or Halloween, the dead would play tricks on mankind and would cause panic and destruction, they, the spirits, had to be appeased. And part of this appeasement process involved the giving of food to the spirits as they visited the homes. End quote. This formed the foundation of the modern practice of trick-or-treat. Now, what other specific customs of Halloween today are related back to the ancient pagan religious practices of the past? I'd like you to listen.
Another Halloween practice that goes back to the ancient Celtic religion is that of displaying fruits and nuts. And this, of course, has a dual aspect, one to keep the spirits that were released on that day happy by giving them an offering of food, and another because the Celts believed that certain nuts, for example, were sacred. They even thought that the acorn was a god.
Next, we're going to examine the question of Halloween and whether or not Christians should participate in it from a different angle. Mainly, can it be shown that the activities of Halloween are in any way connected to the world of the occult? Well, I asked this question of Dr. John Weldon, and here's what he said.
To the question, are the activities of Halloween in any way connected to the world of the occult? Let me assure you that they definitely are. Several days before Halloween, we find our children's classrooms decorated with ghosts and witches and black cats. The kids are all out buying costumes related to the occult. What do you think these symbols mean? Let me again assure you that these symbols and many of the practices associated with Halloween are clearly related to the world of the occult.
Now maybe you're wondering, how do you guys define the word occult? Well, I'm glad you asked, and here's the answer.
Okay, what is the definition of the word occult? The occult actually means something hidden, and it's used in the sense of establishing contact with supernatural forces in order to get power and knowledge from them.
Now, if that's the definition of the word occult, how is Halloween connected to the occult? Listen carefully.
How are Halloween and the occult connected? Well, they're connected both historically and today. Historically, we find that many of the practices of the occult, such as seeking contact with the spirit world, various forms of divination, were practiced by the ancient Celtic peoples who came from Asia and settled in the British Isles and northern France. We see that today, many of the practices of Halloween are also involved in the occult. It's the special day of witches, where they believe that the line connecting the material and spiritual worlds is thinnest, and it's one of the best times for establishing contact with the spirit.
Now remember, even the Encyclopedia Britannica teaches that Halloween is connected with occult activities. Remember it said, quote, "The souls of the dead were supposed to revisit their homes on this day, and the autumnal festival acquired sinister significance, with ghosts, witches, hobgoblins, black cats, fairies, and demons of all kinds said to be roaming about. It was a time to placate the supernatural powers controlling the process of nature." End quote. Now, are there people that are carrying on these same occult practices today in our society? Well, the answer is yes. Dr. Weldon explains.
Margot Adler, in her book on modern witchcraft, says this: the greater Sabbats are Samhain, and that's Halloween or November's Eve. It's also the Celtic New Year. Notice that the witches actually use the name Samhain here. This was the Celtic god of the dead who was said to have released the good and evil spirits in order to allow them to come back and communicate with the living. Witches believe that Halloween Eve is the most crucial day of the entire year for establishing contact with the spirit world because the veil is said to be thinnest on this particular day.
Now, if you dress up one of your children as a witch, I think you need to realize what witches in our own society do on Halloween. Also, if you want to know why there's a picture of a big black cat next to a witch on your child's bulletin board at school, and what that signifies, Dr. Weldon explains.
What do witches do on this special day, Halloween? They seek to establish contact with the spirit world, and in particular, their own spirit guides. Many of you are familiar with the witch's black cat. This was actually a belief that the cat's spirit was a familiar spirit that could be contacted in order to get information about the future or other important things to the witch. This goes back to a belief called shamanism and animism that believes that everything in the world has an actual spirit. And therefore, there's a spirit in the cat, there's spirit in trees, and they can be contacted for information. One former witch says this: as a witch, you always seem to seek the counsel of a spirit guide. All this goes back to Halloween and the Celtic New Year, in which the god of the dead was said to have released the spirits of good and evil individuals in order to establish contact with the living.
Now, what are we driving at? What's the point of all of this information? Well, we're just starting to scratch the surface on the implications of these practices at Halloween. But in a nutshell, here's what we're driving at.
The issue here is whether or not it is wise and good to dress our children as witches, given the symbolism that we find in Halloween and the reality of witchcraft in the world today and the evil that is associated with it.
Now, I want you to know that I, too, find it ironic that on Halloween so many parents are dressing their children as witches, when we have this terrible reality of witchcraft historically, as well as many people in our own society today who are promoting and practicing witchcraft. Many parents don't seem to realize the implications of allowing their children to dress as witches. Especially if you're a Christian, let me just read you a few scriptural statements about what God thinks about His people copying or emulating or imitating the ways of those in the occult. In Deuteronomy 18:9, God told Moses and the Jewish nation, quote, "When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations." End quote. You know, it's interesting that in the New Testament, in the 3rd book of John, chapter 1, verse 11, we find the word imitate again. There the apostle writes, quote, "Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good." Now the Greek word here is mimeomai, which comes from mimos, from which we get the word mimic, which means an actor or someone imitating someone else's action or way of life. The same word is used in a positive sense in the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 7, where we read, quote, "Remember those who led you, who spoke the word of God to you, and considering the result of their conduct, imitate their faith." End quote. In other words, do as your Christian leaders do. Follow their actions or mimic their way of life. But in relation to the question of whether or not Christians should participate in Halloween, I think what God says in the New Testament applies. Namely, He says, "Do not imitate what is evil, but what is good." The Old Testament seems to be even more specific. God says in Deuteronomy 18, "You shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations." Now, what are those detestable things of the nations? God lists them in the verse below where we read, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire." Now, that's talking about human sacrifice. "Nor one who uses divination," such as using the Ouija board or astrology. "Nor one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead." Further, God goes on to say, "For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord. And because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out," talking about the peoples of the pagan nations, "before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so." Further, in Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 2, we find these words, "Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the nations." Now we're going to talk more about imitating, learning, and teaching our children about the evil ways of the nations in the weeks ahead. But in brief, it seems to Dr. John Weldon and myself that Christian parents should not allow their children to dress up as devils or witches, demons, or ghosts. If we allow this, aren't we saying that, one, we either don't believe in these things when the Bible says that such things are real, and two, aren't we saying that we're willing to give credence to the spirit world? That is, it's okay to hold on to the tradition of the spirits and the witches, ghosts, and evil spirits? That it really doesn't bother us? And this, even though in our world today, we know that there are more than 1,000 channelers channeling spirits in Los Angeles alone. And we know that there are people in the New Age movement who are contacting spirit guides. All of this in spite of the fact that Christians know we're in the midst of an occult revival, and Christians cannot be neutral toward this revival. We know that God condemns such practices. So it seems to me that Romans 12:9 applies, where it says, "Abhor what is evil, and cling to that which is good." Or 1 Thessalonians 5:22, where it states, Christians are to abstain from every form or appearance of evil. Like I said, we're going to talk more about this in the weeks ahead. But I've asked...
And It really don't say Christians. This is what they put in there. It don't say Christians.
Dr. John Weldon to summarize why it's important for Christians to know all of this information, to know about the origin of Halloween.
Look, Yeshua who walked this earth, he never said he was a Christian. He never told you to go out and be a Christian. He told you make disciples in the world. And he say Christians.
Listen.
Okay, why is it important for us to understand the origin of Halloween? First, because these things are factual. They really happened. Second, because the symbols and practices of Halloween all harken back to ancient pagan occult beliefs and practices that God has condemned in Scripture. Third, because having this information will allow Christians to make a determination on whether or not they should participate in Halloween.
Whether the public chooses to believe in the frightening growth of Satanism or not, the fact is that a highly organized network of Satanists are operating in America and Europe today. They seem to be respectable members of society and are integrated into all professions and walks of life. We go now to a special report from noted author Hal Lindsey, who is on location at a site known to be used for satanic rituals.
We came out to a place in the hills east of Los Angeles, to a location that has been identified in the past with ritual, worship, and we believe Satanism. Frequently, this site has been discovered with candles that had been used in ritual, and you can look at some of the artifacts we found here today. Upside-down crosses that were put around. It was a dramatic upsurge in satanic worship, beginning with Anton LaVey and his writing of the Satanic Bible and the founding of the Church of Satan in San Francisco in 1966. I watched as this accelerated, not just in the West Coast, but around the country. When Charles Manson and his gang in 1969 committed the horrible, brutal crime at Sharon Tate's home, this was done in connection with all of the paraphernalia of Satan worship. This started a whole avalanche of satanic crimes. We've seen serial murders. We have watched as one after another has been brought to light. Many murders where satanic symbols have been discovered. The pentagram, 666, and all sorts of things of this nature were done. But more distressing, we have found all over the country reports that there are animals that have been mutilated in a very skillful and specific style that shows that they were ritually.
Look, on the side note, you know that dude that played in Boys in the Hood? The one that leaned at the car and shot Ricky, right? Okay. He started doing gangster shit for real in real life, and he went to jail. And when he went to jail, he decided to change his life and become a Christian. Well, somehow he got put inside of a cell with a Satan worshiper, with a devil worshiper, and I guess he was trying to tell him about God, and the dude killed him and put a pentagram up in the jail cell. The dude from Boys in the Hood that shot Ricky got killed in the jail by a satanic white dude. Back to the video.
Offered as sacrifices. There are now confirmed cases where there have been girls that have been used as breeders, and their infant children have been sacrificed to Satan. Halloween seems to be the high holy day for the Satanist and the occultist. Halloween is the time when all across the country, in secret little places, in the dark, there will be little babies sacrificed to Satan. You don't believe it? I know it's hard to believe myself. But there has been such an acceleration of worship of Satan that we believe that these sorts of things are happening, and we have evidence that they are.
Satanism exists in this country as it exists elsewhere. It is appallingly evil. It is about murder. It is about child abuse. It's about sexual abuse. It is no joke and must be taken seriously and must be dealt with.
If they can ritually abuse children, if they can in any way
sexually abuse children, anything to destroy a child's innocence or their trust or their wonder at the world, they will do it.
The most tragic stories that I've ever heard are where a child has told people what's been happening, and the adults have said, "Don't be stupid, that doesn't happen in this country, you're making up stories, you're lying."
The problem we're coming across is that the higher officials in these public organizations do not want to acknowledge that this is occurring. We need to lift that veil of misunderstanding and saying, hey, this is a crime to be dealt with. It's the crime of the 90s. It's not going away.
Satanists want to recruit. We know that it's been going on for many years. This is not new. But their arrogance and their outwardness about the way they recruit is becoming unbelievable.
Sometimes they'll simply suck them in through the local high schools, sex and drug parties.
We have an epidemic of young people participating in some strata of Satanism. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all out sacrificing human beings, but they may very well be doing the rituals that involve mutilation of animals. One fire department individual told me all of the woods...
Now that's some scary shit, man. Just think about it. Your kids could be out there right now doing sacrifices and stuff, and you wouldn't even know. It wouldn't have to be humans, but still, to take all to do is you start with a little bit that's planting seeds. They want to plant evil seeds in you that's gonna blossom, and then by the time you're older, you Charles Manson. It ain't funny, but I'm just saying. That's how they do. They start when they're young, right? That's what's happening. That's what's happening. They don't want to snatch up grown-ups all the time because it's hard to get them to confine sometimes. The younger ones, they snatch them up because it's easier.
Around our area have these types of rituals going on. It is believed that if you kill an animal, that exerts a tremendous amount of energy that the people there can sort of vampirize on. And so animals would be slain, and this is especially true on the high holidays like Beltane and Samhain, Halloween, and May Eve.
Something about sacrifice. If you do it once, you want to do it all the time. Once you've actually passed the barrier of sacrificing an animal, you get this sort of bloodlust where you really want to do it. And I really wanted to do it.
This lady in a black robe came forward with this little baby. And at first I didn't realize it was a real baby. And she just laid it on the altar. It was breathing, but it wasn't crying. And then the high priest just took the athame, or the ceremonial dagger, and just cut the baby's throat and caught the blood in a chalice. At that point, I was staggering, reeling. I thought I was just going to throw up. I just couldn't believe it, but by then I was so scared that I just stood there. And then when I was led forward, I thought, this is it, it's your turn, they're going to kill it. And I was lifted up onto the altar. Now, I at that time was still in white. It was part of a sacrifice known as the sacrifice of the White Virgin. And the same blood that had come from the baby was daubed all over my body. Then the high priest raped me. And I think at that moment, I was just, the fact I was still alive went through my mind. I thought, you're still alive. I then had to sign in blood a parchment stating that I would never ever reveal what had happened in a coven. If I did, I would die.
Are human beings being sacrificed? Yes, they are. There's a lot of things that I would look for to make a determination on a ritualistic crime.
But there's the catch, though, man. A lot of cops don't tell you when it's ritualistic crimes happening in your neighborhood. It could be Satanists running around in your neighborhood, and the police won't inform you of this, which they should.
It could be marks that are found at the scene. It may be things like a pentagram. It may be an upside-down cross. It could be, again, the number 666. It could be a loss of blood in the body, certain parts removed in a certain manner. Their victims, some were targeted for specific reasons. One, because they wouldn't join. Two, because they did join and they want to drop out. Some of their victims are themselves. They voluntarily do it.
In many satanic groups, a mother will be asked to sacrifice her own child to Satan, and she may even, in fact, be ritually impregnated to do that. She may even specifically have been impregnated, and then when the child is born, they never register the child as being born, and they kill it in a very horrible way, and sometimes the mother herself is actually asked to do it.
Some of you may not even believe what you've just said.
Now tell me that don't tie into the same thing that these stars do when they sacrifice their kids sometimes. Real shit, man. This goes full surface.
You may believe that this is just something that's aberrational and that it just doesn't reach the mainstream of America. But just think about some of the headlines we've had recently. The case in Matamoros, where a group in Mexico were practicing human sacrifice, where they kidnapped and actually sacrificed several innocent young people. And think about the Night Stalker case here in Los Angeles, with Ramirez brazenly flashing the satanic symbol. And
that's why Satanists and people that's worshiping that is dangerous people, man. Real talk, dangerous people.
saying "Hail Satan" and holding up his palm with a pentagram in it. And yet Ramirez was convicted of some of the most brutal crimes that we've ever seen in this civilized society. One case where he caused the woman to say "Hail Satan" while he was raping and sodomizing her alongside of her husband, whom he had already murdered. These are things that were done as a result, I believe, of getting involved in Satanism.
The real Satanists, the hardcore Satanists, are involved in criminal activity, and for that reason they are going to try and look as normal as possible, the better to be able to deceive you. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're teachers, they're oftentimes people who are in positions of great influence over small children.
Seances in an effort to contact spirits of the dead.
What you commonly call Halloween. In the occult world, they call it Samhain. Now, when you look at the name, it looks as if it's saying Samhain or something like that. No. This is properly pronounced in the ancient Gaelic as Samhain. Samhain, according to occult tradition, was the Lord of the Dead. Now, around 900 BC, a very fierce nomadic people came into the areas of what used to be known as Gaul, Saxony, Brittany. We know it now as the British Isle, and of course it eventually went to Scotland, Ireland, and the rest of the surrounding areas. These people were known as the Celts. Now the Celtic people, they were so fierce and so barbaric that twice they held off the famous Roman legion and extracted heavy tribute from Rome itself. They literally held all power from 900 BC to approximately 900 AD in that area. The Celtic Lord of the Dead, Samhain, is just another name, Samhain, for Nimrod. You study all the myths, all the occult myths of Samhain. He is also a stag god. Has horns just like the stag god of the occult world that is so constant. But this particular time of the year, October 29th through the 31st, those 3 days constitute what's known as Samhain. Everyone thinks Halloween is just a one-night thing, October 31st, but it is not. See, in the occult world, this is a 3-day fire festival. It lasts from the 29th through the 31st. During the time when the Druid priest held power in Great Britain, now the Druids held all power. You couldn't get married without their permission. You couldn't hold any type of official title in the clan without their permission. You couldn't even attend any of their religious ceremonies without their permission. They literally held power over all life and death, and you're really going to find out how in this. During the nights of Samhain, the Druids would gather at these giant megalithic stone circles. One of the most common known stone circle is, of course, Stonehenge. Just about everyone has seen Stonehenge at one time or another, be it in picture or if they were actually there. Now, Stonehenge, as I said, it's a megalithic crop circle. Megalithic crop circle, that's the UFOs. Wrong subject. But we could always get there. This is a megalithic stone circle. It served 3 specific functions. First of all, it was a temple complex. Second of all, it served as an astrological observatory. Third, it served as a place of human sacrifice. Archaeologists have already unearthed, underneath Stonehenge, over 4,000 human skeletal remains. And that's just Stonehenge. There are hundreds of these throughout the British Isles. This one, believe it or not, is small compared to some of the others. The one in Aylesbury is over a mile in circumference. This is just a small one. And there's over 4,000 dead human sacrifices underneath it. You multiply that by X amount of hundreds of these stone circles, and I think you'll understand what the Druids were all about and why they were so greatly feared by the common folk. During the time of Samhain, the Druids, in this example, they would meet at Stonehenge. They had a giant cauldron, a black pot, that they would fill with what you would best understand as an apple cider-like substance. They would light the pot, and then all the Druid priests would go out throughout the countryside. They would go to various mansions, to castles, to people of nobility such as the earls, marquises, dukes, what have you. They would walk up to the front door of these places, and you want to know what they would yell out? Trick or treat, exactly. Now see, trick or treat is a 2-part expression that literally sent waves and waves and waves of panic throughout the people who ever heard it. You see, if the Lord of the Manor cooperated with the Druids, he would take one of his own servants or one of his own household members, someone of his own family, and pass them over to the Druids to be used as a human sacrifice offering that night. The Druids would leave you a treat for your cooperation. They would take a pumpkin that was previously hollowed out and filled with human fat. They would leave it on the front doorstep and light it. This served as a ward of protection from all the demonic forces that would be unleashed that night. Now this is where we get into the trick. If you did not cooperate with the Druids, they would take blood from a dead body that they had actually been dragging around and paint the six-pointed star with the circle around it. This is known as a hexagram, from the Latin hexere for six. This is the foulest, the most evil of all the symbols in the occult world. I don't care what anyone else tells you. You need that symbol if you're going to summon a demon to this plane of existence. The Druids would paint that in human blood on the people's front door. Someone would die between those nights because of the demonic forces that were summoned. 4 or 5 hours later, the Druids would all return, in this example, as I stated, back to Stonehenge. Once they got back to Stonehenge, they would take these people and put them in these cages. One particular cage is of great interest. They would take those wicker reeds. Remember how we had talked about those before, how the Easter egg landed in wicker? And it's a very, very durable material. What the Druids would do a week before Samhain began, they would send the Celtic warriors out throughout the countryside, where they would gather up thousands of these wicker reeds. Once they brought them back, they formed a giant wicker man. The wicker man looked something similar to this. It stood approximately 25 to 30 feet in height and was just intercrossing wicker reed to where it formed the effigy of a human man. This would usually be 2 to 3 levels in height and have cages running throughout it. The Druids, once they brought back all the human sacrifice offerings from trick-or-treating, they would throw them into those cages and tie them. Now, if by some chance they ran out of space in the wicker man, they had these regular square cages made out of wicker that they had set aside just in case. Now, this is where the Druids now would have their version of fun. They would take approximately 12 prisoners, 12 people now who were going to be used as human sacrifice offerings, and line them up in a single row in front of that cauldron. They would take an apple, throw it into the cauldron, and say, if you can take that in between your teeth on the first try, you will be set free immediately. Who would do that? Raise your hand. Who would try to grab that apple in between their teeth so that they could be set free? Who would do it? Raise your hand, please. There's only one problem, though. That cauldron has been boiling away for 4 to 5 hours now. The boiling temperature of liquid is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, who would do it? No volunteers? You? You know, you'd be the only one then who would have a chance of living. You see, if you didn't try for it, you were going to end up as a human sacrifice offering anyways. This was your only way out. Every single person there did take the chance, except with dire consequences, let's face it. After they plunged their heads into that boiling liquid, their faces, their neck, and I don't even know how much of their chest and back literally was to where they would be permanently disfigured and unrecognizable. Many of them went blind.
I ain't gonna lie, man. I think I would have did it.
Because of the 212-degree liquid that was burning their eye sockets away. Many end up as partially or permanently deaf because of the damage that was done to their ear canal. And the damage that was done to their speech and to their respiratory system because all that liquid was funneling down their throats while they were trying to grab that apple. And yes, this is where you got that cute little game, bobbing for apples. Now, if you did grab that apple on the first try in between your teeth, they held to their promise. They let you go. Some life afterwards. But if you didn't do it, they would throw you on the ground and behead you right there on the spot. Samhain is the highest night of human sacrifice on the Illuminati's calendar. And the reason it is because this is, at this time of the year, what's known as a crossroad. It ends the old year and begins the new one. Now, all crossroads in the occult are sacred. Another example would be where the beach begins and where the beach ends and the ocean begins. That's a crossroad. That's considered a sacred spot. All crossroads are sacred. Now, during this time of the year, it is believed that those souls that had died from who knows how long ago, because the veil that's separating the third and fourth dimension are supposed to be at their thinnest, those departed souls can cross over and visit their loved ones for the night. But nothing guaranteed that these spirits would be benevolent. In order to keep these spirits in line, the Druids came up with these hideous masks and decorated their robes with all types of occult symbols to control these demonic spirits, if you would. And you know, this is where you get your costumes for trick-or-treating from. Let's face it, it comes straight with the mask and the outfit to this very day.
Let me see how much is left, man. Oh, that was almost over. Alright, now y'all got the scoop on Halloween, how it came about, all that good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and cut it right there. It's just a little bit left, you know what I'm saying, and then I'm going to start talking. So, so it's not too long because we already been sitting there for a cool minute. But this is hashtag Info Community. I thank everybody for coming through, man. I did this night, but I don't know, you might see it tomorrow morning because it's going to take all day to upload. But anyway, man, y'all be cool out there, man. And remember, if you ain't getting knowledge, you ain't getting nothing. I crew this.